Take a look at this graph. It might just be the most important one you'll ever see. Population growth exploding. And this might be the most significant event in human history. A turning point where humanity's greatest achievements, prosperity, stability, equality, trigger a global crisis unlike anything we've seen before. Experts call it a population tipping point, the start of a population collapse that we don't know how to stop. Some see a silver lining, less strain on the planet, more to go around. Others, economic collapse, environmental disaster. But there's one thing that almost everyone tackling this question agrees on. It's coming, fast. And it could end up pitting our greatest accomplishments as a civilization against us. When I was in high school, there was this video. This Swedish geographer, Hans Rosling. Here we go. Rosling graphs every country on Earth over the past 200 years, charting their health and wealth. It's the most optimistic lecture you'll ever see. As the years go by, each nation, a point on this graph starts climbing, from sick and poor to healthy and wealthy. There's no catch. Pure positivity. The lecture ends with Rosling declaring that despite small fluctuations,
everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
It's an unbelievably optimistic projection, possibly the best news of all time. And sure enough, in my life, that's been happening. With very few exceptions, the nations of the world have been getting wealthier. But there's something that this video doesn't show. And it has to do with this number, the total fertility rate. For simplicity, we'll call this the birth rate. This number tells us how many children, on average, each woman gives birth to in a country. If it's above 2.1, the population grows. Below 2.1, it shrinks. When I was a kid, the worry was that we were growing too much, that globally there were too many people. Headlines warned of famine, resource scarcity, water wars. China had a one-child policy. Overpopulation was the focus. And so, as we watch countries climb from poor and sick to healthy and wealthy, no one noticed the silent bomb that was hitting each of these countries as they crossed the finish line. After World War II, Japan had a baby boom. By the 70s, that boom fueled a soaring economy. Children born in the ruins of Imperial Japan became wealthy, urban professionals. From poverty to prosperity, health and wealth. And that's the moment it hit. Right after reaching its peak, the birth rate dips silently, far below the replacement rate. And no one really notices. Those baby boomers were still around. Population was still high by Japanese standards. But over decades, that changed. Unlike in other countries where immigration could keep the population afloat, in Japan you could see the collapse with your own eyes. Schools closed, marriage rates fell, and adult diapers started outselling diapers meant for babies.
Outsell those for babies.
It's visible in Japan, but it happens everywhere. Wealth, then collapse. There's no question, once a country gets wealthy, its birth rate falls. With the exception of Israel, this is true of every single developed country on Earth. And if wealth is the trigger, we're in no position to stop it. Prosperity isn't a project we're about to give up on. Poverty is bad. Wealth is good. And
everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
But it means that this collapse is coming too, for the global population, for humans everywhere. Okay, before we go any further, you might be wondering why any of this is a problem. Surely fewer people on Earth would be a good thing. Less resource strain, climate reversal, more to go around, abundance. And yes, the benefits of a smaller population are real. But it's not the destination, it's the road to getting there. A smaller population, great. A shrinking population, not so great. Before any benefits, things will have to get worse, a lot worse, for the economy and for the environment. This is a map of GDP per capita, and this is a map of carbon emissions per capita. Without exception, when countries get rich, the people inside them want more stuff. And just like the birth rate falls when the countries enter the healthy, wealthy quadrant, their CO2 emissions skyrocket. Long term, it might balance out. CO2 emissions go up, the population plummets, the country nets a lower CO2. But timing is everything. Unlike small collapses of the past, disease, famine, war, this collapse comes with a delay. Once the birth rate falls, the population still takes a full human lifespan to come down. And in the meantime, you get the worst of both worlds, high emissions and a peak population. Just a few years ago, the birth rate in India fell below replacement, but population lags. India also just surpassed China in terms of its total population size. Sure, over the next century, India will shrink and the emissions will come down. But in the meantime, 1.5 billion Indians will continue to get richer and emissions will surge. Again, the end point is good. The population will eventually come down, but the road to get there is rough. The same story plays out with economics. Sure, a smaller population could be great here, more resources per person, but again, the road to get there is rough. And that has to do with what's called the dependency ratio, the number of people working in an economy versus the number of people relying on that economy for support. In countries with baby boomers just now exiting the workforce, a lot of the developed world, this is a familiar problem. Suddenly there's this big generation all reaching old age, requiring pensions and healthcare, which all cost an economy money. This is something that puts massive financial strain on any system where this happens. But with a population decline, the problem isn't the bigness of the aging generations, it's the tininess of the younger generations. And that difference is crucial. This is important to understand. We're used to baby booms, but booms can only be so large. The population can only grow so fast. A woman can only have so many kids. All that is out the window when it comes to population collapse. There is no limit to how fast a population can shrink. And that's when this ratio between the young working generation and the old retired generation can get seriously out of whack. The baby boom across many countries represented the sharpest rise in population in modern history. When that generation ended, for every 100 grandparents, there were about 120 of these young baby boomers. That sudden growth shook the economy. But it was nothing in comparison to what happens when a population shrinks. In Korea, where the birth rate has fallen the farthest, experts predict that by 2050, for every 100 Korean grandparents, the country will have just 13 grandchildren. That top heaviness is something we've never seen before, and something like it is expected to hit every country on Earth. So yes, one day a small population could mean sustainable prosperity, more food per hungry mouth. But in the meantime, getting there, the collapse, will mean far more mouths and far fewer people, workers, to feed them. There's also the economic problems that come with population decline itself. Most economists will tell you much of the current wealth in the developed world was fueled by a century of this post-war population growth. A growing population meant that every year, companies had a growing customer base and a growing supply of workers. We've existed in a world where growth was built in, but if the population shrinks, that reverses. In a shrinking world, even successful companies will have to lose customers every year. The population is getting smaller. In a world like that, even the idea of a stock market where people bet on a company growing becomes impossible. Again, even successful companies will inevitably shrink. And while most economic busts are short, this depression could last for a century. Okay, before we get to potential solutions, I want to address two solutions that might have already come to mind. The first is immigration. If you're in the English-speaking world and you look outside, there's still lots of people. In Canada, for example, where the birth rate has already fallen, immigration policy specifically focuses on working-age people to fill out the young working-age population and balance out the boomers that are leaving the workforce. Immigration is vital to most developed countries for this very function. Canada's birth rate is falling, but its population is still growing. Remember, economically, a falling population can be devastating. Immigration, in the short term, fixes that problem. But it can't fix it forever. Right now, Canada's biggest immigration sources are India and China. But guess what? Both of those countries' birth rates just dip below the replacement rate. Soon, they'll be shrinking. They'll be in the same boat. China and India might try to source immigrants from Africa, the only big region on Earth that's still growing, but it's just a matter of time before the same thing happens there. Africa will get wealthier. Their birth rates will drop too. When it comes to the economics, immigration can help for the moment, but it's only hitting snooze. The second solution that might have sprung to mind is the potential for this whole thing to self-correct. Right? If wealth leads to population decline and population decline leads to less wealth, then wouldn't that low wealth lead population to rise again? Yes, that's what some experts predict, that there's this self-correction that could happen. But that self-correction isn't one that we should welcome. In fact, it's a possibility that we should be terrified of. This is probably the most important part to understand about this whole thing. Birth rates don't fall because of wealth directly. They fall because of the things that come with wealth. Things like political stability and women's rights. And so if we're predicting that a drop in wealth might trigger the population to increase again, then let's understand exactly what we're predicting there. That would mean that as countries become poorer from this, they return to a state of being unstable and dangerous. Maybe even more disturbing, it would mean that as our economy backslides and starts looking more like it looked before the great booms of the 20th century, the role of women would backslide along with it. It's a horrifying prospect, and one that we can only hope never plays out. If we're going to find a solution and avoid this collapse, it's worthwhile digging into both of those things: stability and women's rights, the two strongest connections between rising wealth and plummeting population.
For the liberty of the people, by the people.
As a general rule, wealthy, developed countries are more stable. By contrast, the developing world is often unstable. Illness, child mortality, war. These are real threats. With constant uncertainty about the world around you, having more kids, even if it means less investment in each one, is a good strategy. It increases the odds that at least some will thrive. But in stable, wealthy countries, that uncertainty is gone. If you do everything right, your child should have a good outcome. In a country like that, putting all of your energy into just one or two kids makes a lot more sense. If we scale that up, the instability of World War II is part of what fueled the baby boom. But by the same logic, stability is what leads to this. But okay, if a country's stability is what's driving population down, it isn't much help. Like we said, we're not about to make life in the West dangerous and unstable with the hope that it'll bring birth rates back up. But the same is also true for the other driver of population decline, what some experts think is the main factor that leads this to happen, for birth rates to fall as a country gets wealthy. In the early 2000s, people buzzed with enthusiasm about global development, about countries making this remarkable yet treacherous journey from poor and sick to healthy and wealthy. Malala Yousafzai was shot by the Taliban. In the years that followed, she became an icon. She came to represent the importance of the struggle of women in the developing world.
On women's rights and girls' education.
A powerful idea started emerging.
The cure for poverty really is the empowerment of women.
Consistently, international aid projects proved the idea was right. Educate girls, provide access to birth control, a country gets richer. But importantly, the opposite is also true. Wealth leads to more rights for women. After World War II, the American economy took off.
The automobile factories are humming, going ahead.
The US in decades became
To a flying start.
incredibly wealthy. And then, right on cue,
Million women march to work each morning.
women flooded into universities and the workplace. The economy thrived. Equality, in large part, prevailed. But it was also the dawn of what feminists termed the work-family conflict. The years devoted to schooling and careers led women to delay starting families. And that delay meant that women, on average, had fewer childbearing years remaining. And families shrank. We can work on resolving this work-family conflict, but just like we won't make countries more unstable to boost birth rates, in some ways we're in the same spot here. Wealth, stability, women's equality, these are the greatest accomplishments of the developed world. This is what's so hard about this issue. It puts us at odds with our very best achievements. Even with civilizational collapse on the line, these things aren't negotiable. But now that we've talked about the biggest drivers of population collapse, that incidentally are things that can't budge, let's talk about one smaller driver that might offer a solution. Back in Japan, another big shift happened after the war. People moved to cities. In the countryside, kids were basically your retirement plan. They could work on a family farm or haul in the catch on a fishery. They could take care of you when you got old. And land was abundant. There was space for a big family. But after the war, Japanese cities became some of the most crowded places on Earth. Wealth grew. Most things got cheaper. But housing costs skyrocketed.
I'm excited to show you my tiny little home. It's 8 square meters.
Plus, urban jobs weren't the kind to be passed down. They were the type that needed an expensive university degree. In the countryside, everyone was poor, but kids were cheap. In cities, everyone was comparatively rich.
Japan was catching up.
But kids were pricey, and so families shrank. It's worth mentioning that this explanation for why populations shrink has flaws. For one, if it's all about housing being too expensive, we'd expect the super rich would still be having lots of kids. But they don't. In fact, they have fewer. But still, broadly, this is true. In a country with higher housing costs, fewer babies. And if you accept the premise that with time, all countries will develop,
One can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
and developed countries have low birth rates,
Birth rate is the lowest in the
the
world.
collapse is inevitable. All we're really talking about is stopgaps, ways to slow the fall. And housing could be one of them. Unlike the improved stability in wealthy countries or the progress in women's rights, the rising cost of housing is one driver that we should want to reverse. This is where there might be a bit of good news. The trend is on our side. I live in a city where two things are true. Housing is massively unaffordable, and there are houses and condos being built everywhere. As I wander around this city and contemplate what the next 100 years will look like, I can't help but imagine what will happen to all these homes when the millions of people they are meant to house are gone. When, inevitably, my city of 6 million people shrinks down to a few 100,000. When the generations come and go and all these homes
In
remain.
Japan, 9 million properties sit empty.
It seems eerie to imagine a world with less of us. But if you do, it's not crazy to imagine a world full of empty homes. 4, 5, 6 of them for every one person. That's the world that most of this math points to. A world where most of our spaces will have to sit vacant. But it's also easy to imagine something else, that even amid economic collapse, with homes available, families just might start to fill them.
And now, why start the world?
What I loved about that presentation by Hans Rosling was that it allowed us to zoom out. He showed us centuries in minutes. This population drop is coming. It's a baked-in price to pay for a healthy, wealthy world.
200 years of remarkable progress.
But if we zoom out, it means that in the end, humanity could have it all. Health, wealth, and a sustainable world for the perhaps small group that will one day be here to enjoy it.